Beneath the cold glare of distant suns, the dreadnought Obsidian Fong drifted above the smoldering remains of another human colony. The ship's hull gleamed obsidian black, its jagged edges catching the pale light as if even the stars feared to illuminate it. From the command deck, Admiral Voren Kale regarded the burning landscape below with the detached interest of a man inspecting the aftermath of a minor storm. His gold-flecked eyes, sharp and reptilian, never betrayed emotion unless he chose to let them. "Another nest cleared, Admiral," murmured his second-in-command, a lean officer whose voice carried the faint rasp of their species' desert heritage. Kale's mandibles twitched with the faintest curve of amusement. "A nest. Yes, like termites. Busy, territorial, endlessly multiplying, and equally fragile." His gaze slid back to the flames below, where human survivors scattered into the wilderness in pitiful clusters. Their ships had fallen quickly, primitive craft that barely skimmed the upper atmosphere before being swatted from the sky. He turned away before the flames died. There was no thrill in conquest anymore. Humanity, like so many before them, offered only the illusion of resistance before folding under the Empire's heel. The cycle had grown tiresome. On the deck below, the crew celebrated in restrained tones, speaking the human tongue with practiced cruelty. "Do they even have fusion yet?" one snickered. "Perhaps we should leave them some of their rock huts this time." Kale let the mockery run its course. Soldiers needed confidence, even arrogance, to keep the machinery of Empire grinding forward. But he, more than most, knew the limits of that arrogance. A century of campaigns had taught him that danger often wore the face of weakness until it no longer needed to. Still, humanity had shown no sign of being anything more than another provincial nuisance. That assumption cracked hours later. It began with a distress signal, ragged, human voices shrieking across the void as Kale's fleet descended on what appeared to be a minor relay station near the blue and white world they called Earth. Resistance was laughable, a few orbital cannons, half a dozen defense drones. All fell silent within minutes. Then came the broadcast. It wasn't a plea for mercy or a declaration of surrender. The voice was calm, almost bored. "You don't understand what you've awakened." Kale leaned forward in his command chair, claws tapping the armrest. The transmission cut abruptly, leaving the bridge in taut silence. Around him, officers exchanged puzzled looks before someone finally snorted. "A bluff," muttered his weapons chief. "Dying breath of a beaten people." "Perhaps," Kale said softly, though he filed a moment away. His instincts, honed across decades of war, did not like surprises. The relay station burned like all the others. Yet amid the wreckage, a single human vessel detached from the chaos and slipped into deep space, engines burning steady rather than desperate. Not fleeing, not pursuing, simply leaving. Kale's eyes narrowed. Hours turned into days as the fleet pressed deeper toward human strongholds. Resistance stayed minimal, almost perfunctory. Skirmishes fought as though the humans needed to be seen fighting rather than to win. On occupied worlds, their civilians were withdrawn, eerily silent, as though waiting for something unseen. Reports trickled in from scouting wings. Entire human colonies abandoned before arrival, infrastructure left intact but empty, as if the enemy had somewhere more important to be. Kale studied the data late into the fleet's third night in orbit around a half-burned agricultural world. His officers lounged nearby, trading jokes about soft-skinned bipeds and their quaint planetary militias. One suggested humanity was finally learning its place. Another proposed they'd all be absorbed into the Empire's labor systems within a decade. Kale didn't respond. His attention lingered on the abandoned colonies, the oddly deliberate evacuations, the lone ship disappearing into deep space without a word. It reminded him of predators feigning weakness to draw rivals in close. He dismissed the thought, yet unease coiled in the pit of his mind. By the campaign's second week, the pattern sharpened. Each human defense line cracked too easily. Each planetary stronghold offered just enough resistance to look convincing before folding with suspicious speed. The science officer finally voiced what Kale had been thinking. "Admiral, what if these colonies weren't meant to be defended? The command deck went still. Weapons officer scoffed, but Kale stared at the tactical map glowing before him. One by one, human territories lit crimson where his fleet had triumphed. The conquests formed a crescent across the outer systems, a path leading straight toward the human homeworld. A path they had been invited to follow. The realization settled like ice across his thoughts. Still, orders were orders. The Empire had decreed humanity's subjugation, and Kale would see it done. Yet the admiral in him, the predator who had survived 100 campaigns, sensed movement beneath the surface. Something deliberate. When the fleet prepared for its final push toward Earth itself, Kale stood before the viewport, watching the stars slide past like cold sparks. His officers awaited the usual speech of triumph, the promise of swift victory. Instead, he said nothing at all. Behind them, the conquered worlds burned quietly. Ahead, the human homeworld waited, silent and watching. The Empire believed the war nearly over. Kale, for the first time in years, felt the faintest edge of uncertainty. It clung to him even as the fleet accelerated toward its next target, unaware that somewhere in the dark between stars, humanity had stopped retreating and begun waiting. The colony was empty. Admiral Voren Kale stood on the bridge of the Obsidian Fong as reconnaissance drones swept through deserted streets below. Homes still stood. Power grids still hummed. The atmosphere processors whispered on schedule, maintaining air for people who were no longer there. No bodies. No resistance. Just absence, deliberate and complete. Kale's claws tapped against the rail as he studied the feeds. Human settlements, he knew, did not evacuate like this. They scattered. They rioted. They burned. This was something else entirely. Perhaps they've finally broken, muttered his weapons chief with a humorless grin. Fled to their caves to wait out the end. But Kale's instincts bristled. It was too clean. Too silent. He had seen panicked retreats before. This was a one. This felt arranged, as if every human had risen one morning, packed their belongings, and vanished with military precision. The science officer's voice cracked through the tension. Admiral, movement detected. Orbital perimeter. One vessel. Human design. Kale turned sharply. Alone? Yes, sir. Approaching fast. The alien crew readied weapons as the human ship slid from the planet's far side, its hull painted in the same deep blues and grays as their abandoned cities. No distress calls. No surrender flags. It drifted closer until its image filled the Obsidian Fong's main display. Then the transmission came. A single figure stood before the camera. Human. Armored but unarmed. Voice measured and cold. Admiral Kale, the man said, as though they were acquaintances rather than enemies. You have taken the bait. Now, watch closely. Kale's mandibles tightened. Around him, his officers exchanged uneasy glances. Bait? Before anyone could speak, the transmission ended. The human ship pivoted away and shot into the upper atmosphere, its engines bright against the dark. At that same moment, the colony below erupted, not with soldiers, but with autonomous drones rising from concealed bays like a swarm of steel hornets. They fell upon Kale's nearest destroyers with terrifying precision. Shields collapsed under coordinated strikes. Engines died before crews could scream. Entire warships vanished in expanding fireballs while Kale's flagship hung untouched, forced to witness the sudden reversal. The weapons chief snarled, demanding retaliation, but Kale saw it for what it was. Not a battle, but a demonstration. The humans hadn't tried to kill him. They wanted him alive to understand. The drones withdrew as abruptly as they'd appeared, retreating into orbit before vanishing into faster-than-light corridors. Silence reclaimed the system. Admiral, the science officer said quietly, they planned this. Kale stared at the tactical map, where his missing destroyers flickered out, one by one. He thought of the abandoned colonies, the single ship delivering its message without emotion. The humans were not panicking. They were maneuvering. That night, if time aboard a starship could be called night, Kale accessed restricted human archives taken from earlier conquests. Old wars, mostly internal. Grainy footage of burning cities, skywide nuclear detonations, oceans choked with fleets exchanging missile fire. He watched armored soldiers crawl through trenches filled with mud and gas, carriers sinking beneath storm-black seas, skies scarred by bombing campaigns that lasted years. Humanity, he realized, had spent millennia perfecting the art of killing itself long before turning weapons outward. A voice behind him broke the silence. His second-in-command had approached, cautious. "Admiral, do you believe they possess strength equal to the Empire?" Cale didn't answer at first. On the screen, soldiers in 20th century uniforms charged through artillery fire with a ferocity his own species reserved for extinction-level threats. Humans fought like creatures with no instinct for surrender, as though survival itself bowed before defiance. "They fight differently," Cale said at last. "Not for territory, not for glory, for the simple refusal to be ruled." His officer frowned. "But we are stronger." "Were," Cale corrected softly. Across the next 3 systems, human behavior grew stranger still. Colonies evacuated before the fleet arrived. Orbital defenses sometimes fired a few token shots, then went silent. It felt like marching into a vast, empty theater where the actors had already left, and somewhere behind the curtain, the real performance prepared to begin. The High Council demanded progress reports, impatient for total conquest. Cale gave them victories on paper, while withholding his growing unease. He suspected the counselors, safe in their glittering towers far from the front, would not understand until too late. By the 4th system, the trap finally showed its shape. Human forces emerged without warning across 3 sectors at once, not ragged militias but fleets armed with weapons Cale had never seen. Wormhole signatures bloomed like blooming stars as ships appeared and vanished between attacks, impossible to pin down. Precision strikes gutted supply lines while viral code devoured Imperial communications, turning whole battle networks to static. Cale's forces scrambled to respond, but the humans were already gone, leaving wreckage spinning in their wake. Every move felt predicted, every counterattack anticipated. On the bridge, panic simmered beneath professional discipline. Officers spoke in clipped tones, too controlled, like men afraid to admit fear aloud. Cale alone remained still. Not calm, never calm but focused. He had asked once if humanity possessed strength equal to the Empire. Now, he realized strength was the wrong measure. This was intelligence sharpened by desperation, strategy tempered by centuries of internal bloodshed. The Empire fought to win wars. Humans fought to end them. When the next transmission came, it carried no threats, no boasts. Just a single sentence spoken in that same steady, unnerving tone. "Cease fire, or prepare for escalation." The voice did not shout. It promised. Cale ended the recording himself, ignoring the questioning stares of his crew. He thought of the empty colonies, the waiting silence, the way human fleets struck like blades rather than hammers. Somewhere beyond sensor range, they were watching him watch them. For the first time in his long career, Admiral Voren Cale felt the slow, unfamiliar curl of fear along the edges of his mind. And humanity, patient and waiting, tightened the noose. The Imperial High Council convened in the vaulted chambers of Zareth Prime, their crystalline towers glittering against the dark skies of the Empire's core world. They had summoned Admiral Voren Cale to account for the sudden reversals along the frontier, though most still believed the setbacks were temporary. A few daring strikes from desperate primitives, nothing more. Cale stood before them, posture rigid, eyes cold. He described the empty colonies, the coordinated evacuations, the human fleets that struck like ghosts and vanished before counterattack. He told them of the precision, the silence, the way humanity spoke as though holding cards the Empire had not even imagined. Some counselors shifted uneasily. Others laughed openly. "Admiral," drawled Counselor Razik, draped in ceremonial silks, "you make them sound like strategists of legend. Yet they bleed. They fall. Their fleets are smaller, their technology centuries behind our own." Cale's voice remained even. "They are behind because they fought each other instead of the stars. Now they have turned outward, and everything they learned tearing themselves apart. they turn upon us. Razik waved a dismissive hand. One species cannot challenge an empire spanning 1,000 systems. Another counselor, younger, sharper-eyed, leaned forward. And yet they already have, she murmured. Debate fractured the chamber. Some demanded overwhelming force to crush humanity before their tactics spread fear further. Others whispered of negotiated armistice, unthinkable days ago. Kale listened to them argue, expression unreadable. They had not seen the colonies burn, nor the human fleets arrive and depart like phantoms. They had not heard the calm in that human voice promising escalation without rage or bravado. These counselors feared loss of territory, loss of tribute. Kale feared something deeper. He remembered the old war footage, the endless carnage of humanity's own history. They had fought themselves with more ferocity than most species could summon for extinction-level threats. And now that ferocity was united, aimed outward, at them, orders came regardless. Push forward. Take Earth itself. End this farce before panic spread among the outer systems. So Kale obeyed. The fleet advanced toward the Sol system in silence, its officers shaken but disciplined. Gone were the earlier boasts, the casual cruelty. Crews spoke in low tones, glancing often toward the stars as though expecting human ships to emerge from the void at any moment. When the attack came, it made the earlier ambushes look like rehearsals. Human fleets erupted across 3 sectors simultaneously, appearing through wormholes that ignored Imperial tracking arrays. One moment space was empty, the next it burned with hostile signatures. They did not engage in open battle. Instead, they struck supply convoys, communication hubs, isolated destroyers, vanishing before Imperial fleets could regroup. Whole battle groups found their engines dead, their weapons offline, as viral code slipped through networks once thought unbreakable. Kale's command ship fought through 3 such assaults in as many days. Each time, the humans withdrew before destruction could be mutual, as if denying the Empire even the satisfaction of a proper fight. Panic spread along the frontier. Civilian worlds sent desperate messages to the High Council, demanding protection as human fleets bypassed military strongholds to strike deep in Imperial territory. In the council chambers, debate turned to shouting to accusations. Some blamed Kale's caution, others his refusal to commit to full orbital bombardment of human population centers. Kale ignored them. He had begun studying humanity as one might study a predator glimpsed through jungle mist. Patterns emerged, deliberate evacuations, decoy fleets, false transmissions. They played war like a game of impossible complexity, sacrificing ground without hesitation while preserving strength for killing blows the Empire never saw coming. On the 4th day of the campaign, Kale watched another Imperial ship vanish under human fire, its wreckage scattering across the thin atmosphere of a frontier moon. He thought of the counselors demanding victory, of Razik's mocking smile. He wondered if any of them understood that humanity was no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting to win. That night the message came again, same calm tone, same chilling restraint. Cease fire, or prepare for escalation. No threats. No insults. Just that flat promise. Kale stared at the recording long after it ended. His officers waited for orders, their faces tight with exhaustion and fear. He gave none. By the 6th day, the Empire's outer defenses lay in ruins. Supply lines collapsed. Planetary governors demanded fleets for their own protection, fracturing Imperial coordination. Some worlds declared neutrality, refusing to aid either side until the outcome grew clearer. A few even opened communications with human forces, offering information in exchange for mercy. The Empire had not faced real war in centuries. It had grown fat, complacent, drunk on the illusion of invincibility. Humanity was stripping that illusion away one calculated strike at a time. When Kale finally ordered the fleet to regroup near Zareth Prime, it was not for defense of the capital but because communications from half the Empire had gone dark. Human fleets moved faster than reports could follow. On the bridge of the Obsidian Fong, officers whispered about surrender, though none dared use the word aloud. Kale said nothing. He stood before the viewport, watching stars slide past as the fleet limped homeward. He thought of humanity's silence after every victory, the way they offered chances to surrender rather than annihilation. That frightened him most of all. Conquerors sought glory, vengeance, dominion. Humanity sought none of these. They sought only to win so completely that the Empire would never rise against them again. And for the first time in its long history, the Empire had no idea how to stop them. The fleet limped into Zareth Prime's orbit beneath a sky already fractured by fear. Imperial broadcasts carried half-truths about temporary setbacks and isolated rebellions, but no one believed them anymore. Too many worlds had gone silent. Too many governors now whispered of neutrality or surrender, as if sensing the Empire's centuries-long grip beginning to loosen. Admiral Voron Kale stood in the council chambers once more, his armor scorched from the last retreat. Around him, counselors argued in desperate, overlapping voices, demanding explanations, scapegoats, miracles. The Empire had not suffered defeat in generations. They lacked even the vocabulary for it. Kale listened only long enough to understand what they refused to admit. They were already beaten. Humanity's fleets had vanished again after carving through shipyards and command hubs, leaving the Empire's heart exposed. The counselors still believed negotiations might preserve their dominion. Kale knew better. "They will not stop," he said finally, his voice cutting through the chamber like a blade. "Not until we surrender, or they decide we no longer matter." Razik sneered, though his silks hung looser now, his eyes ringed by sleepless nights. "One species cannot unmake an empire." "They already have," Kale replied. Before the council could answer, the chamber doors shuddered open. A messenger, pale and trembling, announced that a human fleet had emerged from wormholes at the system's edge, larger than any previous sighting, advancing with impossible speed toward Zareth Prime itself. Panic tore through the council. Commands overlapped. Evacuation plans collided with half-formed defense orders. Kale left them to their chaos and returned to the Obsidian Fong, the only place where orders still carried weight. The human fleet did not slow. They came in silence, weapons cold until Imperial defenses opened fire. Then the void erupted. Orbital platforms died in minutes. Planetary shield generators collapsed under pinpoint strikes that ignored civilian districts entirely, dismantling only military power with surgical precision. Kale commanded his ships into formation, but it was like trying to hold back a tide with bare hands. Human vessels moved as though sharing one mind, vanishing through wormholes and reappearing behind Imperial lines, tearing through engines, reactors, command bridges. On the surface below, the Council transmitted frantic surrender offers that received no immediate reply. Humanity fought without cruelty, without rage. Every blow felt measured, mathematical, inevitable. Kale watched a dozen Imperial warships vanish in fire across the upper atmosphere. He thought of the early days when his officers mocked humanity as primitives. He wondered if any of them still lived to remember their laughter. The order to retreat came too late. Half the Imperial fleet was gone. The rest scattered toward deep space, abandoning the capital to its fate. Kale remained. He would not flee the Empire's fall. The human flagship descended through the thinning clouds of orbital smoke hours later, sleek and silver against the burning sky. Kale stood on the palace steps as its ramps lowered, soldiers in dark armor fanning out with disciplined precision. At their center walked a single human commander, face unreadable beneath the shadows of war and victory. They met without ceremony. "Admiral Kale," the human said, voice calm as ever, as though this were a diplomatic reception rather than conquest. "The war is over." Kale studied him. "You offer surrender terms?" "Occupation terms," the human corrected. "Surrender was decided days ago. Your council just hadn't realized it." Behind them, Imperial banners burned in the wind. Kale felt centuries of arrogance collapsing like brittle stone. Yet the humans demanded no executions, no parades, no humiliations. "You will keep your title," the human continued. "Governor of these systems under our protection. Stability serves us better than chaos." Kale almost laughed. protection, as though the Empire had not once ruled half the stars. Yet he heard no mockery in the man's tone, only cold practicality, as if conquest were merely another form of mathematics. "Why spare us?" Kale asked finally. "Empires rarely show mercy." The human regarded the burning skyline. "We didn't want this war, but we won't fight it twice. Remember that." Kale understood then. Humanity had not awakened to conquest. They had awakened to permanence. The Empire would not rise again because humanity would never allow the conditions for it. Hours later, as the new order spread through military channels, Kale walked the ruined halls of the council alone. The counselors had fled or bent the knee. It no longer mattered which. Imperial history ended here, not with annihilation, but with irrelevance. He stepped onto a balcony overlooking the capital. Human ships moved across the horizon, efficient, silent, unchallenged. Occupation without cruelty. Victory without celebration. A junior officer approached hesitantly. "Admiral, what happens now?" Kale watched the fleets reposition, sealing the Empire's borders with quiet finality. Beyond them lay other empires, other civilizations watching this war's end with growing unease. "Now," Kale said, "the galaxy learns to fear what it woke." That night, the human commander spoke privately with Kale before departing for orbit. He admitted humanity had not fought a united war in centuries, that only invasion had forced them to remember how. "We wanted peace," the man said. "But peace is built on the memory of what happens when it breaks." When the human fleets finally left Zareth Prime under banners of occupation, no one cheered. Even victory carried the weight of something irreversible. Kale remained on the palace balcony long after their engines faded, staring at stars that suddenly felt smaller. The Empire was gone. Humanity was rising, outward and unblinking, and the galaxy would bend or break before them. Somewhere beyond those stars, other powers watched in silence. Kale almost pitied them. They still believed humanity was merely human. They had not yet learned the truth.